My name's Naina Raisinghani. I work on the AMP core team. Pronouns are she and her. I work on a lot of the UI stuff that folks might have worked with. The team I work with has done stuff like AMP Carousel, Date Picker, Lightbox Gallery, Pan Zoom, etc. Now, let's actually start talking about AMP. Before we can actually start, actually writing code for AMP and filing PRs and design reviews, etc., let's just take a while to understand what AMP's all about. And with that, I have a quick video. OK? Not that quick. So who else is worried by this when you present or when things just aren't loading? I'm kidding. This isn't a video. This is just what our users experience every time they try to open a website. It's loading forever. And you know what? The users, they've come for content. If we don't give them the content immediately, they are going to leave our site. In fact, 53% of users will abandon your site if it doesn't load within 3 seconds. That's longer. That's actually less time than I've spent upstage talking about this slide. That's how quick 3 seconds pass. And in fact, on average, 19 seconds is the amount of time it takes for a website to load on 3G. But for those of you who stand here thinking or sit here thinking that, hey, my people who are looking at my sites are on 4G or on LTE, it's fine. It'll probably take less than 19 seconds. It's probably in the 3 to 5 second category. You would be wrong. 60% of mobile web connections are actually on 2G. And for those of you, and this is 60% of your population, 60% of your users. So when you think about your page's website speed, you need to think about who you're actually catering to. Are you catering to those who buy costly phones in first world countries and who have 4G speed, which is 40% of the population or less? Or do you want to target your website to the entire world's population that has access to the internet? And that's where AMP came about. AMP wants to restore the web to its former glory, where we gave users enriching and interesting content immediately. We want our users to have the same experience that they do on desktop as well on mobile. And we want them to really be able to enjoy the web for what it was initially. And we want to do this by making it easy for developers as well. And that's where AMP came about. AMP consists of 3 parts. The first being AMP HTML, which is a restricted set of custom elements that you use to make responsive and interactive web pages. And then you have AMP JavaScript, which is a very minimal runtime that makes sure that all the resources that these AMP HTML components are rendering are managed properly. And then you have AMP Cache, the most famous of which is the Google AMP Cache, which actually makes sure that, that as your website is crawled, that it's indexed properly, as well as loaded properly. And how does AMP get that speed that we're so proud of delivering to our developers as well as to our users? It does so by imposing certain constraints. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, you only have a restricted set of HTML components that you can use. So if you're using an image on a normal vanilla HTML page, you would use an AMP image, which poses some constraints just to make sure that your users have the best experience possible. You then also have a limited amount of CSS that you can render, 50 kilobytes rendered in a style tag as it currently stands. And then you have no custom JavaScript allowed outside of an AMP iframe. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more. AMP poses these constraints so that we can make sure that we have the expressiveness of the web while also bringing the speed that our users expect from the web. So why should you contribute to AMP? Why are we all here today excited about pushing the web forward? To understand this, let's see why we would contribute to an open source project at all. The first being, when things annoy you, you have the power to fix them. With an open source project, the burden of proof of making sure that the project runs successfully, that everything works correctly, doesn't just rely on one person. It relies on the community together. And AMP has a great example of this out in the wild. When a contributor or a person using a component once noticed that the AMP 3D GTLF component wasn't working correctly, that it wasn't rendering correctly, they reached out and filed an issue. They had some ideas about how to fix that problem, and so they reached out to the person who actually contributed this component, and they reached out back to their team, found a solution, and amongst those 2 developers, they coordinated and filed a PR and fixed that problem that they'd found. And you know what? The only time a Googler had to get involved in this exchange was in their role as core contributor to actually just merge the PR. This was a successful collaboration between 2 people who hadn't met each other, who just wanted to fix things that didn't work at that time. And you can take this step forward. In open source, you can add modules that you think are missing or you think would give more expressive power to that open source project. You can add modules such as you can do in AMP by adding new components, such as AMP date countdown, time ago, etc., that you'll hear about throughout the day. You can also empower yourself to be a little bit more collaborative. When we're working within a company, there's certain rules and conventions that we rely upon to ensure that we have good communication. But when you're stretching yourself to talk to people outside your company, when you're stretching yourself to talk to people who are in a different time zone, that's when you're really pushing the boundaries of being collaborative with each other. And that's something that open source, and particularly AMP, really prides itself on. You also get the chance to build credentials. People who have come to the web have diverse backgrounds. They've started off with, yes, having CS education in universities, but they're also those who are self-taught. They're also those who've taken boot camp lessons or just gone to coding lessons. And you know what? AMP, as well as other open source projects, are a great way of building your credentials, because you don't have to ask a company to let you contribute. You just find an issue, find something that you're passionate about, and you work on it while making sure that you can build your credentials for future jobs or just your university resume, really. And you can be inspired by the people around you. Because all these design discussions, all these feature requests are in the open, you can state your opinion. You can be inspired by the ideas of others to then take these lessons and then put them in different projects. AMP has a great example of it. Our Gust first issue template wasn't something that we hatched on our own. No, it's something that we got inspired by from another open source project, and we then adapted it to our own good first issue template. And you can feel pride. You can share the amount of the work that you're doing. When you're working in a company, usually most of the work that you do is under an NDA. You can't really geek out and talk about the technical details about how you saved your company some memory or some performance speed. But when your work is in open source and it's so much out in the open, you can share those technical details and you can share the pride that you feel in having made that contribution. And so why AMP? Why AMP specifically? AMP is very proud of the goal that we're trying to achieve, which is to push the web forward by really stretching the boundaries of the web. And by contributing to AMP, that's something we take pride in contributing to, that mission. There's also a lower barrier to entry. Instead of having to learn Java, C++, you can just use simple CSS, JavaScript, and HTML to get started. We make sure that the actual barrier to entry to contributing to AMP is as low as possible to encourage as many people as possible to contribute to AMP. And by actually contributing to AMP, by fixing bugs or adding features, you're having greater confidence in AMP as a community and in AMP as a core code base, which means that when you then advocate for your company to use AMP, or when you advocate for your personal site to use AMP, you have trust in the project because you've seen how the community works and you've seen how the code base works. We also hope that we have great documentation and tools here at AMP. And we're actually going to stress test this later during the code labs by having all of you file a PR and get those merged in, hopefully. And so if you find an issue during the day with the documentation or the tools in AMP, don't just file an issue. See if you can fix it. Because we pride ourselves on having great documentation and great tools that we evolve as we add more contributors to the AMP code base. And we hope that we also have a streamlined contribution process where you don't have to learn that much to get started. The tools are easy to use, the tools are straightforward to understand, and you can start by cloning the project to having a PR as soon as possible. If you see any ways that you think you can improve this, again, file an issue or talk to the people who are actually working on the infrastructure team to see if you can help improve the process. And the impact that AMP has is the greatest case for actually contributing to AMP. This slide is a bit old, but currently there are over 6 billion AMP pages out in the wild. Over 25 million domains are hosting these 6 billion pages. And people are creating 90 AMP pages every second, which means if you create a component that really gets traction, it's going to be used in a large amount of the web as well, which means you can go from creating a very simple PR, a very simple fix, or a very simple feature to having great impact very quickly. Now that hopefully I've got you excited about why contribute to open source and why contribute to AMP specifically, let's talk about some of the experiences that people have had contributing to AMP. AMP currently has around 710 contributors in total. 78% of these are those external to Google, from other companies like Twitter, Pinterest, Yahoo, eBay, AliExpress, etc. And in the past 30 days, over 350 contributions have been made to the AMP project. Some of the contributions have been things like AMP date countdown, which was added by AliExpress so that they could flag down sales or a countdown to the sales or extra special events that are happening on their website. Another component that was added was the AMP access later pay, where the later pay firewall added a gateway component into the AMP project so that you could then pay to access content. And those are just two of the many components that have been added by different contributors to the AMP project. Here's just a word cloud of some of the ones that I could manually track down. And this is excluding all ad networks and analytics providers who are working with AMP just to make sure that, that folks using AMP have the best analytics and ad experience on the web as well. When someone from the 10up team contributed AMP MathML to the AMP project, they then documented their experience on not just their own blog, but also on the Google open source project, and talked about the great positive experience that they had contributing to AMP. So I'd encourage you to just get started and just go take the time to go read this article on both their page as well as the Google open source page to understand what kind of experience they had contributing to AMP. So how do you get involved with AMP? How do you actually get your code committed or get your issue noticed? First of all, while you're trying AMP out, while you're just trying to make a demo AMP page, if you have any questions, reach out in our Slack community or reach out on Stack Overflow. And the people who currently use AMP are really helpful. They'll reach out, try and answer your questions, and work with you to make sure that your problem is fixed as soon as possible. And that's a great way of getting involved. In fact, if you know the answer to a question that somebody's raised on one of these communities, feel free to take a shot. Feel free to answer that question just to make sure that everyone's supported in the AMP community. And from then on, if you really want to get to the source of all your problems, go check out the GitHub repository. From there on, you have all access to all the code base where you can take a look at what kind of CSS we're using, what kind of JavaScript, if a button was added properly or not, and really debug your issue a little bit more thoroughly. You can then take a stab at actually filing an issue. And here I'd like to take a step back to make sure that we all understand what makes a really good issue and what makes a really good bug report. Make sure that you take the time out to try and find a minimal reproduction of the issue. If you can't, that's fine as well. But a minimal repro will help whoever's actually going to fix the issue debug it a little bit faster. Make sure to list all the devices and the browsers that you were testing on to make sure that we can understand that the person actually debugging the issue can understand what kind of browsers are experiencing this issue. This is because we want to make sure that the AMP interrupt story is as thorough as possible. You can also list the AMP version number that you're currently using, just so that people can make sure that it's not a regression or regression, etc. You can then use the new issue button as well to go and file a feature request for something that you think would make a great addition to the AMP community. You can also just get involved in current design discussions. This is a screenshot from a design discussion regarding the regarding extending the 50 KB CSS limit. People from the community are getting involved, sharing their ideas, sharing their thoughts and opinions in the most thoughtful ways possible while following the code of conduct. And that's a great way of getting involved. You all have different experiences using AMP, and you all will have different experiences using AMP. And sharing those experiences is a great way of making sure that when we do publish a component, it caters to the widest variety of needs possible. You can also then think of components you want to add yourself and then share those with the community. Share your designs with the community using the intent to implement template. Here, Algolia has created an intent to implement for sharing Algolia results within AMP pages. Then if you actually want to get down and write some code, you can first of all get started by finding all the issues that are labeled good first issue, as those are ones that the AMP community has marked down as things that are easy to get started with. You'll also have a mentor, whoever filed that good first issue, to help you throughout the process and make sure that your tests are passing, make sure that your PR is landed in the most speedy way possible. And how do you actually get started by taking issue? Just say you want to take it on. Find a good first issue that works, that you think you can actually contribute with, and just mention that you're taking this on, and somebody will make sure to mentor you throughout the process. Once you have a PR out, just let us know. Tag the person who's on the issue, or find who owns the component, and just let them know that you have a PR ready to review, and then work with them to get that PR committed. You don't just have to make technical changes to AMP. Like I said earlier, if you find any documentation that needs improving, please go find that issue and fix it. We're happy to get PRs that improve our documentation to make sure that not just new contributors, but everyday contributors have a better experience contributing to AMP. And if you think that there's an example missing, like this person did, go ahead. AMP by example, or even our documentation, can always do with more examples just to make sure that people really understand the innovative ways that different AMP components can be combined together, or really understand what are some of the constraints that the AMP components currently have. So if you find a need to add some examples, feel free to go ahead and do that, and someone will make sure to take a look at your PR. You can also just get involved in our weekly public design review meetings. That's where we discuss things that need a little bit more thorough review, and those are open to everyone to get involved in. In fact, we make sure that the AMP core team makes sure that all the design reviews happen over different time zones, just to make sure that people from different time zones can get involved. It's not just Americans who need to wake up at 9 a.m. to do a code review. People from the EMEA time zone and APAC time zone have sessions that take place in those friendly time zones that rotate, so that you too can get involved and not have to wake up at 5 a.m. to do a design review, because nobody wants to do that. And with that, hopefully I have you excited about contributing to AMP. So let's get started. Ali is going to talk about some of the AMP design principles, and hopefully that'll get us rolling towards contributing to AMP. So thank you.